I'm live. I'm alive. Oh, I always think that when I say my cat is playing at that table. Pepe, come here. I'm reading out of Carola. This is the life, one of Joan Grant's lives. She remembers her incarnations, and this life of Joan Grant plays in the 16th century. She was born on the 4th of May 1510, and Joan Grant lived from 1907 till 1989. Now we have a plane coming over here. Just a minute, I'm just going to write this passes. And I have been reading about her. Carola was the illegitimate daughter of Lord Griffin, and she was banished from the castle with her mother. She's had a tough time. Her mother is dead. Her Petruccio is dead. And she is now in a better place at the moment. She is the wife of Carlos di Ludovici. This is already chapter 24 now. So I have read all the other chapters. And Carlos has just told her of his previous wife who has passed away in childbirth, and he has told her of his godson, who Alcestis, who loved the sea. We are now at the next chapter entitled Statue of Apollo. Even though our life at the house of the high air had none of the formality of Perugia, I sometimes found the role of Donna Carola a little irksome. When this happened, I used to go out alone, often from dawn until nightfall, wearing a dress of grey fustian, which Anna had copied for me from one of her own. At first Carlos protested as my going unattended, but he soon accepted it as one of my unpredictable fancies. One day I wandered further than usual and came to a narrow valley hidden in a fold of the hills. There, set in a grove of ancient ilex, I found the forgotten ruins of a house. It must have been long deserted, for turf had covered the broken walls, and only the ordered ranks of the dark trees showed they had been planted by man. A spring bubbled from the mouth of what once must have been a satyr's mask, and the water flowed down into a long basin cut from the rock. The noon sun was hot, so I took off my clothes and lay there in the shade of the heavy ferns, my body cool and fish smooth under the water. Often I returned, for the place held a drowsy peace for me, as though it dreamt of a secret world beyond the sight of mortals. I used to wonder who had built these walls and planted the shrubs whose children still made flowery thickets down the slope. But it was not until I had been there many times that I knew their origin. In the heat of the day I used to sleep in the shade of a syringa. My head rested against what I thought to be a fallen column, and while there I had waking dreams of the time when the house lived. It was one such dream that I felt the roughness of worked stone under the moss and uncovered part of a vine leaf chaplet. I freed the statue from its green shroud and found it to be of a beautiful youth, either of the god of love or some mortal who in nymph's arms had warmed to immortality. He seemed to smile at me, and, stranger still, in the living stone from which he had been carved, the story of the two who set him here had been preserved, as once I had seen a fly preserved in amber. When I touched the statue, it was as though I became one with him. I could see through his stone eyelids, hear with his carven ears, savour the votive incense burned to his name, Apollo. Scene by scene, the lives of two lovers who had been dead for many centuries unfolded before me. The woman wore robes such as I had seen on Roman amphora. She had been a temple virgin, consecrate to some ritual of an ever-burning fire. The man had been a senator. I know not what rank he held, but I saw him, among other men, on tiered seats of marble below a dais. They wore togas of white or saffron colour, and some were wreathed with bays. For her to leave her dedicated life was to be put to death. For him to gain her was to lose all else, honour and name and power. So was their early love constrained to sorrow. Then to Apollo they addressed their prayers, and they were shown the worldly artifice by which their love defeated circumstance. Many leagues from their city he built this house for her. For labour he used slaves brought from the oars, and when the work was done he sent them as freed men to a province across the sea. When all was ready he went to his summer villa on the coast, and when he knew that a storm was coming up, he set forth with 2 trusted servants on what feigned to be but a short sail. They battled down the coast through monstrous waves, until a sheltered cove was gained, where none could see their landing. From there he reached the temple, where, by a subtle ruse, the women joined him. They travelled swiftly, always at night, and listening for pursuit, until at last they reached this sanctuary. The world believed them dead. The priestess feared to betray that they had lost a vestal from the temple precincts. The women of his household put ashes on their heads and wailed in the streets. The townspeople mourned their senator, who they thought had been snatched from them by Neptune. In the hot weather, awnings were stretched above the courtyard to which their rooms opened. Lucretia would lie there on a narrow couch carved in the form of a swan, while 2 women slaves attended her elaborate toilet. They were foreigners who spoke only a few words of her language. One of them had the proud carriage of those accustomed to be obeyed. Perhaps she had belonged to a ruling family in the country from which a Roman galley had taken her. Yet she smiled as she knelt beside the couch, holding an ointment jar or pouring from a painted flask aromatic oil with which to anoint the smooth body of her mistress. Lucretia's teeth were polished with a black powder. Perhaps it was charcoal, and then she would tint the lobes of her ears and her palms with cardamine. Her hair was dressed in falling curls, bound with bright ribbons or threaded with silver pins. Her tunics were of finely pleated linen, moulding the lines of her body and the springing curve of her breasts. She and Nikelos would walk down the path between the cypresses in seeming formality, but sometimes they forgot their Roman dignity and shedded with their clothes in some secluded glade. There were forests on the hills in those days, where Nikelos used to burn the wild boar, his hounds startling the silence with their baying. He cannot have found it easy to abandon his senatorial life. I have heard him address the cypresses as though they were a critical audience to be won over by his wit. He began to write a political history of the years when he held office, and she to play on a stringed instrument. It had thin, clear notes, less mellow than a lute, and of smaller compass. I think they found the house cold in the depths of winter, as though they had been used to a more genial warmth than comes from open fires. Yet even when the snow had drifted against the walls, enveloped in heavy folded cloaks of yellow wool, they left the house to make a votive offering to Apollo. The years passed, yet nothing came to disturb their serenity. They had a child, perhaps 2 children. I'm not sure if the baby in her arms was the same child that I saw running beside his father. She cannot have lived to be an old woman. Or perhaps love gave her the semblance of immortality, for it was only in her youth that I saw her. Together they found a joy that is rare amongst mortals, and still their laughter stirs that quiet air, and their love remains to bless the paths they made. There did I share an echo of their happiness, and with the statue of Apollo I found companionship, for we both dreamt of that far time when men had loved us for our gods. Next chapter, Carola saw love. For the winter we returned to Perugia, where only in sleep could I go to the house in the ilex grove. It seemed that the eyes of the statue I saw more of my heart than I had recognized before it was stirred by the memory of the Roman lovers, as though I was no longer a watcher but waited for a lover with whom I could share their pleasures. I forgot that once I prayed to be protected against what I thought to be the miasma of desire, and remembered only that I had lived as Carola less than a quarter century. The wheals had nearly faded from my skin, and my long hidden breasts were smooth and young. I found that in sleep I could dream within a dream. In the drowsy heat, the syringa bushes were heavy with scent, and the glade they encompassed was still green, as I had kept it with water carried from the spring. It seemed I had slipped into an ancient past, when Cupid's arrows were shafted with fine gold and feathered with peace. O happy past, whose gates have long been locked against me. This is a dream, but I let it bear me on towards in its tide. I sensed that someone was approaching me. I feigned to sleep and listened for a voice I longed to hear. He spoke. It seems I have become a visionary, for the man who came across these hills was a clod, prosaic as a muleteer. I saw this hidden vale, cool and mysterious. I passed through the sombre shadows of a grove where still the Delphic oracles might utter their sonorous prophecies. And then I reached a house as I had seen on classic urns, yet where its pillars freshly garlanded and shining floor mosaics caught the sun. I knew a woman waited there for me, my woman, who held all beauty in her hands. You know me, for your lips warm to mine, and smiling down at her, Carola saw love. But I woke in Perugia with Anna smiling down at me. Even before she spoke, I knew she had great news. A messenger reached us soon after dawn. Tomorrow our Alcestis will be here. He is come safe into Naples, but they had a desperate voyage, and he must leave his ship there to be careened. Even now he will be galloping towards us. He is always impatient is Alcestis. He always was, even as a baby. My mother helped at his birth. He was always for adventure. Before he was big enough to walk, he used to crawl along the terrace to see what lay beyond it. She was talking more to herself than to me, while folding into a drawer chest the clothes I had worn the evening before. But I knew she watched to see if I ate the curds she brought me every morning and drank the special potion of goat's milk flavoured with sweet wine, which she made for me in wintry weather. She went out to fetch a pan of glowing charcoal to fire the logs, and not until they had warmed the room did she let me get out of bed. I was so impatient to go to Carlos that I would not wait for her to dress me, but told her to fetch a fur-lined robe I had worn when I could walk no farther than the Sola, and to put on ordinary clothes would have fatigued me. I found the steward being given orders for preparing the house in welcome to Alcestis. Carlos was saying, "And tell Caterina there must be suckling pigs and hill mutton larded with green bacon and sprigs of rosemary. We will broach the cask of Spanish wine, for now it must be mellowed to perfection. Tell the cloth merchant to attend the house the day after tomorrow. My son will need new doublets after such a voyage." Then Carlos saw me. "Carola, has Anna told you Alcestis returns tomorrow?" She has no need to tell me, for I saw the joy in her eyes before she spoke, as I see it in yours. What can I do to add to his welcome? Shall I wear the garnet velvet or the russet? I must look very dignified, or he may disapprove your choice of his stepmother." "Disapprove?" he laughed. "You think my godson a fool and blind? I hope he will love me a little for your sake." "How could he help it? But it will be for your own sake, not mine." He hesitated. "You must not be impatient with Alcestis. He has not your vision, nor my joy in it. But he will have much to tell us. Once I might have thought his wonders sailors' tales, but now I'm used to wonders. And if he tells me he has seen a dragon, 100 dragons dark against the sky, I could believe him, for through you I know of angels. Has not one put off her wings to rest a little under my roof. Perhaps I was almost jealous to see Carlos so eager, nearer to happiness than I had ever brought him. To greet Alcestis, I dressed with care and wore the carved emerald on my forehead. As I bound my hair under the gold caul, I might have been putting on my helm to enter the tilt yard. I knew that now I must raise the portcullis, which I had dropped against invasion from the world since I had come to Carlos. With Alcestis, other strangers would enter the house, people who might awaken the Carola who had travelled many roads. They would remind me of the girl who had loved Sandra for a little while. Only the ghost of love, but warm and near. Carlos would be content to listen to Alcestis, but his sailor talk might take me back to the Santa Maria, to Fiume, where I had walked hungry down the quarry, down the quays, searching the grey horizon for a lost sail. I would think of the captain sinking down through the green depths, green as the light in the penitential cell where I had waited summons to the torture. I heard a horseman clatter down the street, the voice of Carlos raised in joyful greeting. I will not hurry. It is fit that my stepson should wait to greet me. I stood at the head of the great staircase. A shaft of light shone down through the high window, making a vivid pool on the grey stone of the hall below. It lit a man who stood there, looking up at me. He smiled, but I knew that he did not remember that last night we were together in Apollo's grove. Well, I stop this here. It's very interesting, isn't it? Chapter next one is 25, Godson of Carlos.